This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
Shabbat Shalom. We want to welcome each and every one of you that is joining us through Facebook or YouTube or any other media, and we definitely want to welcome those of you that are here with us today as we continue the Secrets of Passover, an examination of Passover from a Mosaic, Messianic, and apostolic perspective. And today we're doing part 4. And of course, my heart and my passion is to open up things that have been lost, stolen, things that have been discarded throughout the years, and restore back to the body of Messiah that which belongs to us, that which Adonai gave us. And I am of the persuasion that the Torah is still valid today, and we as a messianic body of believers, and even those of you that call yourselves Christians, this is something that needs to be restored. And today, we're going to be, in a sense, going, and we've already done 3 parts on the Passover, different secrets that I believe have been hidden and that we've been opening up. And we want to make sure that we follow what Adonai says. Now, the Passover Avodah is in 3 parts. The biblical Passover is in 3 parts. By the way, notice that it says the Passover Avodah, not the Passover Seder. Of course, the Passover Seder is the word that is used in Judaism and in Christian messianic circles and different, but the actual word that is used in Torah is the word Avodah. The word Avodah means a work, but it comes from the verse there in Exodus 12 that says that when your children ask you, what does this Avodah mean? Notice that they didn't say, what does this Seder mean? Or what does this Haggadah mean? They say, what is the meaning of this Avodah? And of course, it's translated as a ritual. What is the meaning of this ritual, of this work? What are we doing here tonight? So that's why, because that's what they asked, that's what it is. It's an Avodah. And there are 3 parts to the biblical Passover Avodah. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 is the Korban Pesach, what we call living the story. And this is the first Pesach. They lived the story. On the first Pesach, they were told to do this, this, and this. And they did. In fact, we have a list of what they were told to do. They were told to, on the 10th day of Aviv, to select the lamb. On the 14th of Aviv at twilight, sacrifice the lamb. Offer the blood on the lintel and doorposts of their homes. Prepare the lamb, roast the lamb. Eat the lamb with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And they were told to memorialize. This will be a memorial, a zakaron, a remembrance, to tell the story to their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren there in Exodus 10 also. And then they were told to burn anything that's left over. No leftovers. This is for the first Passover. And this also went to the subsequent Passovers in Numbers 9, in Deuteronomy 16, and all the way up to 70 A.D. when our temple was destroyed. And so part 1 has to do with the lamb, with the sacrificing of the lamb in the first Passover in front of the door of the home. The second Passover in the time of Moses there in Sinai, all the way up to Solomon, it was in the tabernacle. And then Solomon, it was in the first temple. It was Zerubbabel, the second temple, and then the second temple as Herod remodeled it in Yeshua's time. And of course, Herod's temple is the one that was destroyed in 70 AD. And so that was the Korban Pesach. Since then, we have not been able to do part one. Part one could only be done in Jerusalem, in the place where Yahweh gives his name a home. The home of the name of Yahweh is Yerushalayim, the foundation of peace. And that's the only place where you could have a Korban Pesach, a sacrifice of the Passover. You have to have a temple, and specifically an altar and a priesthood to do the sacrifice. Now, from the second Passover, in the first, you're told to relive it, retell it. And in the second Passover there in Numbers 9, we come with what's called the Haggadah. The word Haggadah means a retelling, and you retell the story. And so from then on, the story was retold, and it's retold, and it's retold even till tonight. For us here at our congregation, we are celebrating Passover tonight. By the way, isn't it interesting that you have Judaism and they have the Jewish calendar? The Jewish calendar is set. All Jewish people know when Passover is. They celebrated Passover last night. They follow conjunction new moon, and so they did their Passover last night. The Catholics and Protestants, the Christians, have their Christian calendar, and they know when Easter is. They know when all these celebrations are. The interesting thing is we Messianics have about 5-6 calendars. And what we're doing now is we're actually getting away from the Jewish calendar and getting away from the Christian calendars. And so we are at a time of transition where we're tweaking. What does it say here? And we're trying, because that's easy. It's easy to follow the Jewish calendar. It's easy to follow the Christian calendar. But when you come to Torah, and that's probably why each has their own calendar, because when you follow Torah, to many people it could become confusing, and some we don't know. Even, I believe, Jewish scholars still don't know all the idioms associated with the Hebrew from the time of Moses to come up. So we are now in a time of restoration where we're restoring aspects of the true dates of Passover. So for now, we're going to ask every believer to be patient. All the Messianic groups that we're doing Passover at different times, I'm going to ask for patience, that you be patient with me, and I will definitely be patient with you, and that the most important thing is that we have love for one another. Love is the most important thing. And because, like I always say, I don't know everything, and neither does anybody else. And while we may all be wrong, we can't all be right. So let's be patient. And if you celebrated Passover last night, or you're going to celebrate it tomorrow night, or whenever, and it's not the time we're doing it, please don't say, well, you guys are wrong. Well, at least we're getting started. At least we're coming back, and that's the key. We're coming back. And the Messianic movement hasn't been too far, and I'm talking about those that are trying to get back to when are the real dates. Now, part 3 is something that Moses and all the way up to Yeshua's time, they only did part 1 and part 2. They did not have a part 3. Part 3 is what is called the Master's Banquet. The Master's Banquet. And that comes from 1 Corinthians 11. And that's fulfilling the story. So Moses and the Exodus, they live the story. From the second Passover on to 70 AD, they retold the story. And Yeshua from around 30 AD or CE, the Christian era, whatever system you want to use, the story was fulfilled. Yeshua, when he took the cup and the bread, fulfilled the story. And so we're continuing. Now, we're going to see something very interesting, is that what happened is that Christianity forgot part 3. We couldn't do part 1. They forgot part 2, and they also forgot part 3. And they actually went to another part, a part 4 that, the Catholics and the Protestants do, that is not part of the Passover. The 3 parts have been implemented by Moses, and many times they're forgotten, and Josiah re-implemented them, and many times, for the 70 years in Babylon captivity, and then when Antiochus was there for 2 years, Passover wasn't done, and then Ezra re-implemented him, and Yeshua really brought us what Passover is all about. It's been put on hold. It's been abandoned throughout history. But now we're restoring it. At least we're restoring it. And we're restoring it to the Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic ways. Not tradition, but we're trying to get back. Every year I tweak it. Every year I study, and I find new things, and I kick things out, and I put new things in. In fact, we do have 2 papers that anybody would like. I would have to get my kids to do this, but if anybody wants our Passover Haggadah, I have it in a leader's form, and I also have it in a participant's form. And if you would like to have our Passover Haggadah that we use here, you're welcome to email to TorahUnleashed@gmail.com, TorahUnleashed@gmail.com, and I will have my son and daughter take care of that, and we will be able to send you a copy of this so that you could, if you want to, even just know what we're doing. It might be different from you. I always like to study what other pastors are doing. In fact, one of the local pastors through one of our brothers just sent me a thing of what they're doing at another Messianic congregation. A little bit different than us, but it's okay. We're at a time of learning. And so it's a time of what? A time of restoration. A time of restoration, but for who? What do we want to restore? It's a time of restoration for Judaism. From the oral law, from the Midrash, from the Kabbalah. Now, I ask for patience again, especially to my Messianic Jewish brothers that are out there and listen or are told of what we teach here. I really feel that many of the Messianic rabbis are spending too much time with the oral law, the Midrash, and Kabbalah, and not really focusing their research, especially on the New Covenant scriptures. And Christianity, we need to have a time of restoration from canon law. The Roman Catholic and the Protestants, they all have their catechisms, they have all their laws, and a lot of groups like non-denominational Pentecostal groups, while they don't have a package or a book of common prayer or a catechism or canon law, they still have all these ideas that are not right, and we're going to focus on some of those later on. We need a time of restoration from anti-Semitism. I believe that much of what has been stolen and taken away and why we're not doing things are from the anti-Semitism in the early days, even before the time of Constantine. A lot of people, bash Constantine a lot. But it wasn't just Constantine that was anti-Semitic. Even some of the earlier church fathers that are called the early church fathers, many of them were already, by 135, that we had a lot of men that were in the body of Messiah that had gotten away from Torah, gotten away from the New Covenant scriptures. Marcion is one of them. Arius is another. And again, part of the problem with Constantine is that he inherited the controversy between some of these false teachers that were anti-Semitic and some of the Orthodox teachers and that they wanted, like Melito and some of these other people. If we have time, we'll get into Melito and something like that, some of those people. But there was a lot of anti-Semitism. I believe when the Gentiles came in, like Paul says, don't be proud. It's the root that supports the branches. And the root is Torah. It is the word of Elohim, our foundation. And anti-Semitism has done a lot to damage the true Pesach, the true Passover that Adonai wanted us to have. And of course, antinomianism. And nomos is the word for law. And of course, it's anti-Torah. That many people are anti-Torah, and they're against what the Torah teaches. But what's interesting is many people say, well, the Passover, that's for the Jews. And, that's the law. The Sabbath, that's the law. But then they make Sunday a bigger law. A holy day of obligation. It's a mortal sin if you don't go to Sunday Mass. Well, wait a second. That's just, whatever you're saying that the Sabbath is law. Well, that's even another law, but that's a man-made law. The Torah is from Elohim. And so I want to restore. And because when you restore, you got to do a lot of work. We're just about to restore the inside of this building. We're going to take a lot of this wood paneling off, and we're going to sheetrock. We're going to take the carpet. The carpet has gotten old. We're going to take the carpet out. We're going to put new carpet, and we're going to do some out with the old and in with the new. But when you restore, if we want new stuff, if we want new carpet, we got to get rid of this carpet. We can't put the new carpet on the old carpet. You got to get rid. And some of the people say, well, you're bashing these people. I'm not bashing you. I'm just saying, let's get rid of what is old and we don't need so that we could bring in that which is true. You got to get rid of the false. We got to come in with the truth. Paul to Timothy and Titus, if you read those books, he's constantly talking about the doctrine. The people are getting into this doctrine and that doctrine, and we need to have sound doctrine. So I really want to restore. So let's get rid of some of this stuff, both to my Jewish friends and my Gentile Christian friends, my Jewish Orthodox, Rabbinic, and my Christian Gentile Protestant Catholic friends. We're going to begin with the Messianic mystery. The Messianic mystery of the Matzatosh and the Afikomen. Now, of course, the word Matzatosh or Matzatash depends on who you read, spelled differently. The Tosh or the Tash is more of a new word, but there is a bag called the Echad, for the matzah, that the matzah is put in. And The matzah tosh, whether you have it in a stack with napkins dividing it, or you actually have a little bag, an echad, and put it in. The word echad means one. And this echad is one little bag. But this echad has three compartments. And one of those compartments is the afikomen. And so let's look at this. The echad is a trifold napkin or bag that has three pockets for 3 pieces of matzah bread. The middle matzah bread is broken in half and put into a second napkin and hidden, buried. Safun, it is hidden. It's safun, hidden. Now, what's interesting is that Orthodox Judaism really doesn't know the purpose of this bag. They know what a matzah tosh is, but they don't know the purpose. They don't know the reason. Many people say that the one bag represents the unity of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Others say that it represents the unity of the Kohanim, the priests, the Leviim, and the people of Israel. Others say it represents the prophets, the priests, and the king. But whatever the meaning that has been put into them, a question needs to be asked. A question needs to be asked. In this matzah tosh, in this bag, this one bag, echad, there's 3 pieces of bread, and notice that the middle bread, the middle matzah, is taken out, and it's echad, it's broken in half. Now the question is, if it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, why is Jacob broken? Why did they break Jacob? If it's the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the people of Israel, why are the Leviim broken? And if it's the prophet, priests, and kings, why are the priests broken? It doesn't have a reason. But only with Messiah Yeshua and in the Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic Passover, Passover Avodah, can you really see the significance of what this echad is, of what this 3-in-1 is. Now the middle matzah is taken out. It's broken at the beginning of the Avodah, of the ritual. It is broken. It is one of the Sedrim, one of the orders, one of the numbers there in the liturgy. And it becomes the afikomen. The afikomen is the bread from the middle pocket of the matzah tosh. After supper, it is retrieved and used as a symbol for the Korban Pesach. Interesting, in the original Pesach, after the time in the Second Temple period and right before, we don't know when, the last thing that was in after supper and after everything, what they would do is they would have a last piece of the Korban Pesach, of the meat of the lamb. After everything was done and they were ready to finish, they'd say, one more little piece. And this became, I guess, what you would call the dessert, the last thing that is eaten. And the last thing that would come. The word afikomen is a Greek word. So what that tells us historically, that it was during the Greek period, which the Greek period started in Israel with the coming of Alexander the Great around the year 333. And after that, much of Judaism adopted the Greek language. In fact, the Greek language was a language that was very popular after Alexander the Great throughout the world. Even the Romans spoke Greek, and everybody spoke Greek. It was the lingua franca of its day. And so it's a Greek word that has to do with that which comes at the end, that which comes. And the Greek word, epikomenos, means a coming one or something that comes. And again, as dessert comes at the end. Everybody eats dessert at the end. Well, the last thing that they ate in those days, they didn't have what we would call dessert. In our modern way of thinking. But the last thing that was eaten, the last thing that came at the end was the afikomen of a piece of lamb. But by the time after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and the Mishnah was written in around 200 of the Common Era. And so within that time, the afikomen, which was a piece of meat, a piece of lamb, the size of an olive, became, and what they said, this is in the Mishnah, the afikomen is a substitute for the Passover sacrifice. Now, why does the Mishnah say that? Because in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed, and there was no more Pesach lambs to be sacrificed. So they had to substitute. Now, what did they substitute to? Well, what's interesting, and this, to me, this is mind-blowing. Yeshua, who was a prophet, we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, on the day that he comes into Jerusalem, he tells the people, if you had only known on this day the message of peace, there in Luke 24. But the message is hidden from your eyes. The enemy will come and they will slaughter your children against the stones. All because you did not recognize your opportunity when Elohim offered it. What's interesting is Yeshua prophesied the destruction of the temple of 70 AD, which is also prophesied in Daniel 9. And so because Yeshua, on the night that he was betrayed, notice that after supper, he starts a part 3, a whole new way of doing Pesach that the Judaism of its day, Second Temple Judaism, was not doing. And so it is Yeshua that now, after supper, takes not only a cup, but takes a piece of matzah and says, this is my body. Now, Yeshua is the Pesach lamb. He's the Korban Pesach. He's the sacrifice of Passover. In our Haggadah, the Haggadah that I have, the reading of Isaiah 53 is of importance in the story. And so what's interesting is that it is not like now that now that we are doing Pesach, the Avodah, now that many of you are doing Seders, a lot of people are saying, well, we're doing our Seders according to the rabbis, according to Orthodox Judaism. But what a lot of people fail to realize, even scholars from Hebrew University that are Orthodox Jews are understanding this and are saying, wait a second. Now, they're saying it's possible. I'm saying it happened. They're saying it's possible that modern Judaism got the Haggadah as they do it now with a third part from the early Messianic group before it became a Christian movement. From the early Messianic believers, because remember, in 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, the Jewish world was left with two movements. The Jewish world was left with two movements. The Sadducees pretty much were destroyed with the destruction of the temple. That left the Pharisee group, and that left the Messianic group. Now, the Messianic group grew so much. If you read the book of Acts, it even says that many priests, many of the Kohanim and Leviim, made their submission to the way, to the Notzarim, to the followers of Yeshua. And so because the Messianic movement grew, the apostles and their disciples grew. And in Jerusalem, in Judea, Samaria, and even in the othermost parts of the world, it grew to the point that the devastated Jewish community just started doing what the Messianics were doing. And instead of us getting the afikomen and the matzatosh and all this, the third cup, instead of us getting that from the Orthodox Haggadah, the Orthodox Haggadah got it from the early Messianic group. And of course, when Gentiles came in, and because of antinomianism, because of anti-Semitism, what they did is they just kicked all that out. In fact, even in Paul's time, they were still eating. In 1 Corinthians 13, part of the what has become known today as Holy Communion and the Lord's Supper and all that, they were still eating because Paul gets mad at the Corinthians because what they were doing is some of them were getting drunk. Well, Pesach is not a time to get drunk. And many times people in modern Passover Seders, they drink 4 cups of wine. And by that time, many of them are drunk at the end of the Passover. That's not what Passover is. In fact, they need to study about Aaron's sons who got drunk when they were, and they gave strange fire to Adonai, and Adonai killed them. And so, as we see this, the Echad and the Afikomen, the big mystery, the secret that we need to uncover, that we need to unravel, unleash. We need to unleash this, that, wait a second, the Echad, this is not those means. This is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it is the Son that is broken for us. It is the Son who gave his life or who was sacrificed for us. And Yeshua is the Afikomen. He is the coming one. He is the one that comes at the end, and he will come at the end. We're waiting for Yeshua to be the true fulfillment. That's why he says, I will not drink of this again until it is fulfilled in the kingdom. So in the millennial kingdom, all this will be completely fulfilled. Now the third part, what we call the after supper, remember, Yeshua said, the Gospels say, after supper, Yeshua now took another cup and bread, matzah bread, and the Father takes the bread. The Father takes the piece that is called the afikomen, that has been put away, that has been hidden. The word tzafun at the end of the Orthodox Haggadah is the beginning of Yeshua's after supper third part that Orthodox Judaism got from the early Messianic community, that the early Messianic community threw out. And he takes that bread and says the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai, King of the universe, you have given us bread from the earth. And then the Father takes the cup of blessing, and says, Baruch atah Adonai, King of the universe, you have given us the fruit of the vine. Of course, this is just very simplified. There are other verses from 1 Corinthians that you need to read. for that. But this is the main aspect of the third part. The ritual items in the third part in the Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic Passover are the unleavened bread. This is all you need in your plate. Unleavened bread, the bitter herbs, and shank bones. That's all you need. You do not need a Seder plate with all the Orthodox items that have come into play. Now, of course, many of those have nothing to do with the original Passover. And yes, they're very symbolic, like dipping the parsley into salt water. That you could make a symbol out of that. The parsley is a symbol of the hyssop branch that they put the blood on the lintel and doorpost. The salt water is symbol of the tears that our ancestors cried. Yeah, it's symbolic. But the Torah doesn't tell us to do that. And because the Torah, if you want to do that, again, that's fine. That's tradition. So there's a lot of these, the egg, the roasted egg, the Charoshet. Now the Charoshet, I love Charoshet, and that is really the dessert. Charoshet is a mixture of apples and honey and cinnamon with grape juice, and you could put dates, and you could put nuts, and you could put whatever. It's a good dessert, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with having Charoshet. That's what they ate back in those days. But Torah doesn't tell you to make Charoshet for the Seder plate. What we call the plate, in fact, the Torah doesn't even say Seder plate. That's tradition. But yet we do use plates. And the only thing that we use is a plate for the matzah bread, a plate for the bitter herbs, and a plate for the shank bones. If you want to have all those together, that would be fine. But these are the only ritual elements that you need. And of course, you need a cup. And of course, we use grape juice, or many times there is non-alcoholic wine or de-alcoholized wine, where they've taken the alcohol out, and that you could use, especially with kids or those that have a problem with alcohol and have a problem with drunkenness. We need to avoid drunkenness, especially at the Passover table. And this is a warning for those of you that might even use wine at your Passover table. If you start seeing that yourself and or some of the guests are getting drunk or getting, I guess what they call a tipsy or something like that, then it's time to make sure that you bring out the grape juice. Everyone should still have grape juice at your Passover table. And that's a warning, because today people do not understand that we're living at a different world now than back then. We don't want to be Corinthian. We have Corinthian people at many Passover tables, and we don't want to do that. Paul warns, and he even says, if you do this like that, you might, Adonai might kill you. Adonai says, some of you are sick and ill, and some have died because you did not recognize the body. The two sons of Aaron did not recognize that what they were offering to Adonai was strange fire, the incense that Adonai, and the reason they didn't recognize it is because they were drunk. Well, we don't want to do something at the Passover table in an unworthy manner, and then Adonai will bring judgment, the same judgment that he brought to Aaron's sons, he could bring to the Passover table. If anybody is eating and drinking without recognizing the body, Paul says they're eating and drinking their own condemnation. The cup of blessing, after supper cup, the cup of the Brit Kadeshah, in my blood. And it's interesting that in Exodus 24, when the covenant was given to Moses, and Adonai spoke, a lot of people don't know the secret, there's another secret here about. It's not like Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments, where Moses goes up and receives the 10 Commandments on top of the mountain. Adonai spoke the 10 Commandments on top of the mountain, and Moses and the people were at the bottom of the mountain. So Adonai spoke it audibly from the top of the mountain to the bottom. And then Adonai tells Moses, come up here. And Moses goes up and he says, I want you to write the covenant down in a scroll. And Moses wrote the covenant down in a scroll. Moses wrote it himself. And then he goes down and tells the people, we got to have a meeting. And so they kill some bullocks. And Moses gets there in Exodus 24:8, gets the blood of the bullock. And he sprinkles it on towards the people. And he says, this is the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you. This is the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you. That's the first covenant. That's the Mosaic covenant. That's what people call part of the Old Testament. The Old Testament isn't from Genesis to Malachi. That's what Christianity has named it. But the Old Covenant is actually only the 10 Commandments. That's the Old Covenant. as you know, if you really want to look at it biblically. And this is the covenant that Yahweh has made with you. Well, Jeremiah 31:31 says, I'm going to make a new covenant, a Brit Chadashah. Not like the one I made with you when I took you out of Egypt. You broke that covenant of mine. Therefore, this is the covenant I will make with you. Deep in your hearts I will plant my Torah. So the new covenant is the Torah inside our hearts. And so it was in Moses' day when the first covenant was broken. And in Jeremiah's day, when Adonai promises a new covenant, a Brit Chadashah, a renewal of the first covenant, a renewal of the original covenant, not making the first covenant null and void, not making the first covenant obsolete, but adding to the first covenant a renewed covenant. And the new covenant is ratified when Yeshua takes the cup on Passover. Now, one of the things, again, we talked about this before, but I want to make sure we understand this. There's a lot of people saying that Yeshua did not participate in Passover. That actually Yeshua had, the night before Passover night, that Yeshua had a service where he invents what we call today the Mass or the Protestant Holy Communion, and that he didn't do Passover. I am on the persuasion, again, that Yeshua did have Passover that night. And Yeshua takes the cup, and he says, this is the cup of the Brit Chadashah, of the renewed covenant, in my blood. Here's Jeremiah 31:31. Look, the days are coming, Yahweh declares, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Notice that Jeremiah, notice what he doesn't say. Look, the days are coming, Yahweh declares, when I will make another covenant, a new covenant with the Gentile nations. Because Israel and Judah broke it, so I'm going to, plan A didn't work with them, so let's get rid of them and let's start off with the Gentiles. He didn't do that. The new covenant is with Israel and, of course, Judah. The new covenant is for the Jews and Kol Israel. Yes, later on, the new covenant, like the first covenant, allowed Gerim to come in, allowed people to be grafted into Israel. And so Gentiles are grafted in, Romans 11, 16 and following. But Adonai wants to do this. Then I shall be their Elohim, and they will be my people. Adonai wants to accept us. And by the way, that's part of the acceptance of Pesach. Now, since the new covenant, there's been historic Passovers. Passover has gone through all kinds of different changes. Different groups have changed it. And I'm just going to do just a real quick study of this. The last temple Passover Korban Pesach was in 70 A.D. That's the last sacrifice occurred on April 3rd, 70 A.D. After this, Titus, the Roman prince, destroyed the temple and the sacrificial grace system ceased. Remember, the sacrificial grace system of sacrifice is a grace system. Sacrifice is grace. Sacrifice is not works. Why is that? How many of you are sinners? Okay, that's everyone. Almost everyone. Mr. T even raised both of his hands. It's interesting that when we think of grace, we are sinners. To work for your salvation means that you have to die for your salvation. You have to pay for it. And the only payment is eternal death. Now, let me tell you, I don't want to go through eternal death to pay for my sins. Yeshua, Elohim, so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes, trusts, puts their whole trust on him, will not perish but have everlasting life. Amen. And so what's interesting is the sacrificial system said this: you are a sinner. And the person says, I am a sinner. I'm going to bring this innocent, cuddly little lamb, this innocent little lamb without blemish, a perfect little lamb, and I'm going to kill it in my stead. I'm going to kill this lamb in my stead so that I could think, participate in an idea that my sins are forgiven. Now that was an audio visual. That was an audio visual. You saw the lamb, you heard the lamb. You saw you saw the blood. Someone else dies for you. A lamb died for the guilt and shame of Adam. Yeshua now becomes the Passover lamb. And the grace system of sacrifice. I believe in sacrifice for my sins. But what's interesting, the blood of bulls and goats, we are told, was not sufficient. That's why we needed a higher sacrifice. And that the sacrifice of the only begotten Son of Elohim, Yeshua the Messiah of Israel. He became the Passover lamb. He became the one who gave his life. And you know what's interesting? And again, I keep hearing this. People say, well, Yeshua had a service, and Yeshua died when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed so that the Passover lamb could be eaten that night. Well, interesting thing, Yeshua died at 3 o'clock. That's not when the Passover lambs were sacrificed, and there was not a Passover lamb for the nation. There was not one Passover lamb sacrificed at 3 p.m. Yes, other lambs, many lambs, one for each family, were sacrificed afterwards, but it was the day before in Goshen, And in Numbers, yes, it was changed later on by the scribes and the Pharisees. But when Yeshua died at 3 p.m. At 3 p.m. when Yeshua died, it wasn't the Passover lamb that was being sacrificed. It was the sin sacrifice. It was the sin offering. And Yeshua died at the very time. As Yeshua was dying over here on Golgotha, just a valley between them and the other hill, from the Golgotha height to the Temple Mount and Mount Moriah, with a valley in between. At that very time, this lamb was being sacrificed as Yeshua gave up his spirit at the time of the sin sacrifice. And of course, since we don't believe in human sacrifice at the temple, Yeshua gave his life completely at that time. And again, that takes a whole study in itself. Now, after that, there were what we call the Pharisaic Passovers. And this is the birth of Judaism. I'm going to tell you something very important, another secret, another mystery a lot of people don't realize. The Messianic movement of Yeshua is older than Judaism. Judaism was born after 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. Between 70 AD and 200 of the Common Era, between 70 CE and 200 of the Common Era, was the beginning of Judaism. Now, yes, there was Judaism before the Pharisees had, in fact, even from the time Judaism, and we're not talking about the people of Judea or the Jewish people, we're not talking about that. We're talking about a separate system, a man-made system of the tradition of the elders, the traditions of the fathers, that they invented a religion that at the time of Yeshua was just traditions. After 200, it became, we called the oral law. But think of it. After 70 AD, there was no temple. After 70 AD, there was no lamb. After 70 AD, no lamb. They did it on the 15th of Nisan. They did part 2, the Seder, the Haggadah. Yes, they had unleavened bread, bitter herbs. They had a supper. I don't know what else they had. I don't know some of the other things. I don't know when some of these other things were added. I know most of them were added around the Middle Ages, around 1200, we know. But the Pharisaic Passovers between 70 AD had no part 1. Had no part 1. There was no Korban Pesach no more. And so, how did they develop into the next phase of Passover? The Mishnah was codified around 200 of the Common Era to the present, and this is the growth of the oral law. When you think of the oral law, think of the Mishnah. Now, they had a part 2 Seder, Haggadah. They had unleavened bread. They had bitter herbs. And, of course, they had the cup, the wine. By that time, the Mishnah talks about 4 cups of wine. And there was other traditions, laws that have, to the present. The egg, where did the egg come? When did the egg come in? When did the parsley? Now, of course, the egg is called a Chagigah offering, an offering that was given, 4 cups of wine, the prayers. All these traditions, laws, they came in to what is now the Orthodox Haggadah. Now, what's interesting, this is the part that is interesting. After supper, they have a part 3. Where did they get the part 3? They didn't have part 3 before. They got that from the Messianic believers, from the early Kehillah, from the body of Messiah. The 3rd cup and the bread, the afikomen. That part they got from but only Yeshua was doing that. In 30 of the Common Era, when Yeshua died, 40 years later, the temple was destroyed. In those 40 years, think of the Messianic movement not only doing part 1, part 2, but the Messianic movement doing part 3 between 38 AD CE and 70 AD CE, whatever you want to use there. And for those 40 years, the greater Jewish community that probably had friends who were Pharisees, friends who were Sadducees, family and friends that were Messianic, that was a mixture. A lot of priests, a lot of the Sadducees, and some of the Kohanim Haaretz, the priests of, the priests of the land that they called them. Just like now, we all have friends that are Catholic, Protestant, Jewish. People intermarry. People have friends that and family that might be other cultures, other religions, other ways of living. And sometimes when you mesh people together, sometimes you have people doing this and people doing that. That's what happened with the early Gentile Christian church. They went to Rome, and the Roman ideas just infiltrated the church. And so now, as we're going to see at the end, Easter and all these pagan things have come in. So this is very important. I wish most Messianic pastors would understand this part. This is the traditional Haggadah. It has all these different things that they do, and they go through these, and usually takes my first Passover in LA with a friend of mine who was Jewish. He invited me to his home, to their family, Pesach. They went from sundown all the way to 11 o'clock, just going through these, and they made it into a big thing. The Seder plate today, the bitter herbs, the shakbon, the charoshet, the lettuce, the parsley, the egg, matzah bread with 4 cups of wine. This is the traditional Orthodox, rabbinic, many Messianic congregations do these. I do not do this, and I would encourage you, if we're going to restore, we got to get rid of the additions, and let's restore to Moses, to Yeshua, to the apostles. Of course, the Catholic Passovers went to the first day of the week, Sunday, Easter or Ishtar Day. They don't do part 1 or part 2. In fact, they don't do no supper, only part of part 3. They only do part of part 3, which is the cup and the bread. The Mass, the word Mass means et missa, be dismissed. Now, all Protestants follow Rome. Let me tell you a secret. A lot of people don't know this. All Protestants are Catholic. Shh. Don't tell nobody. What's a Protestant? A protester. Luther and all those guys, they just protested a few things that Rome was doing. They didn't protest Sunday. Why didn't Luther go back to show? Why didn't he have a radical revolution and go to the roots of the faith? Why didn't he go back? No, he just reformed some of the things. No praying to saints, no rosaries, no indulgences. That's what the whole Reformation was about. But they continued to be Catholic. Same thing with the Methodists, and now the Baptists. You tell a Baptist, you guys are Catholic. We're not Catholic. We're Baptist, or we're Pentecostal, or we're non-denominational. Yeah, but if you follow Sunday, if you follow Christmas, Easter, if you follow all these things, then you're Roman Catholic. You don't want to admit it. Well, get rid of all that stuff, and let's come back to Shabbat. Let's come back to what the Torah really wants to talk about. Now, the Protestant Passover, again, following the Catholic, is the first day of the week, Easter and Ishtar Day. You see signs all over town. Some of these big even here in Albuquerque, they have this big giant celebration sunrise service at I think at one of the stadiums over here. And other people have all kinds of sunrise service, Easter egg hunts, and all kinds of things like that. They don't do part 1 or part 2. They don't do no supper, only part 3. And again, that's only the little cup. Definitely in Paul's time, they wouldn't have a little cup like that. You can't get drunk in a little cup like that, even if it's alcohol. They have a little piece of bread or a little wafer that melts in your mouth. And they call that Holy Communion. This is not what Yeshua told. When Yeshua said, watch this. Yeshua said, as often as you do this in remembrance of me. This was not the this. This was not the this. Yeshua did not say, and when I was a priest and I would lift up the host and lift up the cup, and I would say, as often as you do this in remembrance of me. And they'd ring the little bell. And that's not what Yeshua told us to do. That's not what Yeshua did. So why are we doing something saying, as often as you do this in remembrance of me, claiming that it's this, and it's not that. And it's not just the Catholic, it's the Protestants. He didn't tell us to do this. He told us, as often as you do this. The this was Passover. And what Passover is all about. We need to restore Passover, family. Of course, the Christian Passovers are the first day of the week, Easter or Ishtar Day, no part 1, 2, no supper, a cup, grape juice. Now, here's where a lot of Christians are starting to use leaven. In fact, there's some Christian pastors that are teaching, do not eat unleavened bread. You have to eat leavened bread because Yeshua used leavened bread. Of course, they say that Yeshua had a pre-Passover invention of the Christian Holy Communion thing, and that Yeshua used artos, that he used leavened bread, not unleavened bread. And of course, they call it the Lord's table, and many of them call it breaking bread. Breaking bread is actually not the communion. Breaking bread is just eating. Anytime you eat, you break bread. The Messianic Passover Seders. Churches are conducting Seders modeled after the rabbinic tradition with a Christian flair. Well, this might seem cool. There are great complications and consequences with this approach. Please do not go to, if a Christian congregation says we're having Jews for Jesus or this group or that group, and they're going to come in and they're going to do a Seder so we can know Christ in the Passover. Please don't go to that. Why? Why? Because that's not what Yeshua told us to do. They do them at the convenience of the congregation. They'll do it on a Wednesday night. They'll do it on Saturday. Now, I have no problem doing demonstrations. If you want to make a demonstration, that's something else. I'd love to demonstrate and teach the Passover to whoever will. And if they would do that, I would not have no problem with that. But not doing actual Seders and Holy Communion and because that's what they do. With anybody invited. Open communion. There's no such thing as open communion. Nobody should be invited to your Passover unless they are walking in circumcision of the heart. And the Passover Seder is not an evangelistic outreach. Misinformed Christian and or Messianic churches and some Jewish organizations have been using the Passover Seder as an outreach promotion. Paul's teaching in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 should warn the body of Messiah that this manner of outreach is not biblical. The Passover Seder is a meal of remembrance. So if you do the Passover meal and you bring in non-believers, no non-believers should be at your Passover. If somebody says, I'd like to come to your Passover, you have to examine them and see if they're baptized. In fact, if you're not immersed in water, fully immersed, you cannot participate in Passover. You have to be a baptized believer to participate in Passover with a circumcised heart. And it's important that we don't do this to bring non-believers in. This is the very time. Now, if you want to do that, Scripture says, bring them to Sukkot. Let them come to Sukkot. Sukkot is definitely the Feast of the Nations, where you invite people. And all the other feasts, in fact, all the feasts are public. Passover is the only feast that is private, should be your family only. In the millennial kingdom of Messiah, Yeshua, with a rebuilt temple, the fourth temple, the believers will celebrate the Sabbath and all 7 feasts. Ezekiel 45, speaking of the future, on the 14th day of the first month, you must celebrate the Feast of Passover. For 7 days, everyone must eat unleavened loaves. Now think of it. When the millennial kingdom comes, Yeshua is going to be sacrificing the lambs. And Yeshua is going to be doing all the sacrifices, the sin sacrifice, the communion sacrifice. All that's going to be reinstituted. Always remember what we started off with. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 2 does not equal 5, and 2 plus 2 does not equal 3. We cannot add or take away from the Pesach. Now, this is a very famous painting. This is the painting of Leonardo da Vinci. The Last Supper versus Passover. The Last Supper versus Passover. The Last Supper, notice that it's day outside. Passover, it was night. Notice that they're eating fish. They ate lamb. Notice that they have leavened bread. It's unleavened bread. And so there's problems that have come into even famous people didn't know their scriptures. People that were doing this for the people that were teachers. And this is in one of the chapels there in Rome, Milan. And it's interesting that they're doing these, but nobody knows how come nobody corrected him. These were supposed to be scholars that they were doing this for. You know what? We are out of time, and so we'll continue here some other time. Next week, we are going to be going into the Aviv. Just want to remind you that tonight is the Seder. Tonight is the Seder here on the 14th. Tomorrow is Passover Day. On Monday, it's a Sabbath, and it's the first day of Matzot, the first day of unleavened bread. And on the 24th is also a Sabbath, by the way, and that's Resurrection Day, Yom Rishon, Resurrection Sunday. Not tomorrow. Next Sunday is Resurrection Day. So I want to make sure that we all know this, and want to thank you for joining us. Let's go ahead and stand, and let's go ahead and pray. Our Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have, and we pray that your Ruach HaKodesh might allow us to restore what has been lost, stolen. And Father, we're still learning. I'm still learning, Father. There's things that I need to know more. And Father, I pray that in order to restore first, we have to get rid. We have to get rid of those things, those traditions, those customs, whether we're Jewish or Christian. Father, whether we're Orthodox Jewish or Gentile Christian, we need to get rid of stuff so that we could bring in the true. Yeverechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha, Ayir Yahweh panavelecha vichunecha, Asa Yahweh panavelecha, vayasem lecha shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you, and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries. Thank you for joining us on our channel. If you have enjoyed this teaching and would like to see more, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so that you can be notified when we have new videos. If you would like to support Olive Tree Fellowship and Torah Unleashed Ministries, please visit us at olivetreefellowship.com or torahunleashed.org. We thank you for your past support and hope to continue with you. Shalom, shalom. Have a good day. Shalom, shalom y bienvenidos a Olive Tree y a la Torah desatada. Les doy gracias a ustedes y a Adonai por su apoyo que nos han dado aquí. Y si quieren continuar a hacer una donación, pueden ir aquí en torahunleashed.org o en olivetreefellowship.com y ahí pueden dar una donación. Su apoyo, su ayuda es importante en estos días. Shalom, shalom.